Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not a pharaoh. You're not draped in gold or strolling through alabaster halls while harps play softly in the background. No, you're just one of the 1,000 nameless bodies sweating at the bottom of the social pyramid. A servant, a foot washer, a living broom with teeth. You spend your days hauling jugs of river water that smells like boiled frogs, scrubbing sandal prints off sacred floors, and praying the lice don't win the war in your bed sheets. Your master believes he's divine. You believe in not getting whipped before breakfast. So before the temple bell rings and you're summoned to clean up another offering that smells like death in a heatwave, leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing where everyone is tuning in from. And if you'd like early access to more episodes like this, as well as other perks like ad-free audio, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the description. For now, lie back, try to relax, and if you start to smell burning frankincense and foot rot, that's normal. Let's begin. You open your eyes for the first time to a world that already owns you. The room is dim and thick with heat, the kind that clings to your skin and seeps into your lungs like wet wool. You don't remember your birth, of course, but it wasn't special. It wasn't celebrated. Your mother was back at work within the week, sweeping the threshold of a priest's latrine while trying not to pass out from blood loss. Your father was somewhere nearby, maybe fixing a cracked cistern or waiting in line for his barley rations. He didn't name you after a god or a constellation. He named you after his dead brother, because at least that name already fit inside his mouth. There was no joy in your arrival, just another mouth to feed, another set of hands to work, another back to bend. You were born into a servant's house, though house is being generous. It's a cracked mud brick cell with a leaking thatch roof and a floor that turns to mush every time the Nile feels generous enough to flood. You share the space with too many siblings and not enough walls. Privacy is a myth, and silence is a luxury no one here can afford. You grow up listening to your parents cough through the night, choking on dust and regret. You learn early not to cry. It wastes water, and no one has time to comfort you. By the time you're 5, your spine already knows what a broom handle feels like. By 7, you're carrying water jugs that weigh half your body. By 9, your hands are blistered enough to make the gods wince, if they were looking, which they aren't. There's no education, unless you count learning how to avoid a beating as a kind of schooling. You memorize the rhythms of the household, when to appear, when to disappear, when to keep your mouth shut so someone else gets blamed for the broken bowl. The master's children are taught to read and write. You're taught how to scrub bloodstains out of limestone. Your lessons are written in sweat and enforced by hunger. The idea of a better life is a story that floats past your ears sometimes, when drunk workers whisper around the cooking fire, always about a cousin who ran away and supposedly made it big in Thebes. Though no one's heard from him in years, you pretend to believe it, even as you clean out the chamber pot for the 4th time that day. The social order isn't just clear, it's sacred. You are not poor by accident, you are poor by design. The gods, in their infinite wisdom, have decided that you are meant to carry buckets and fetch figs and bow until your vertebrae click like castanets. Your master isn't just wealthy, he's divinely favoured. His bloodline is purer, his body cleaner, his breath allegedly sweetened by the gods themselves. You've never gotten close enough to smell it, but you suspect it's just lotus root and arrogance. Still, you're told to be grateful for your station. You could have been born an animal, or worse, a woman. Speaking of which, your sisters don't fare any better. They're put to work even earlier, usually in the laundry pits or the temple kitchens. By the time they're 12, some of them are already married off to men who look like sun-dried crocodiles. You watch one of them vanish into another household, her face blank as she disappears behind a curtain you'll never be allowed to touch. You ask your mother where she went. Somewhere she can be useful, she says, like that's all that matters. You don't ask again. You learn not to look up when important people walk past. You keep your eyes on the ground, even when your knees hurt and your feet are raw. You speak only when spoken to. You smile when food is given, even if it's burnt or crawling. You stop asking why some people have too much while others don't have sandals. The answers, when given, are always the same, because that's the way it is, because the gods say so, because your place is where you were born, and it would be disrespectful to reach higher. The sky's full of stars you're not allowed to name. By your teenage years, your body already feels like it's halfway to broken. You wake up sore, go to bed sore, and spend the day being sore about things you're too tired to fix. You see people die of exhaustion, infection, or divine displeasure, which usually just means they coughed at the wrong time. When a fellow servant collapses during a procession, he's dragged out of sight before the guests can notice. Later, you hear he was buried behind the goat pens. No one remembers his name. You only remember the sound his head made when it hit the floor. You've never known freedom, but somehow you still miss it. There's a weight pressing down on your chest that isn't the heat. It's the knowledge that this is all there is. You weren't meant to build pyramids or write poetry. You were meant to carry things, quietly, efficiently, without complaint. And when you die, whether it's in your 20s or, miraculously, your 30s, you won't leave behind a legacy, just a spot in the mud for the next servant to sleep in. Welcome to your home, though calling it that might be too generous. It's more of a heat trap with walls, 4 mud brick sides, a roof made of whatever palm fronds haven't yet disintegrated, and a floor that alternates between cracked and muddy depending on the Nile's mood. There's no door, just a ragged cloth that used to be a blanket. Your entire family sleeps here. Your parents, your brothers, your sisters, maybe an uncle who stopped working last season and hasn't gotten back up since. If someone dies during the night, there's a brief shuffle in the morning to make room for the living. No ceremony, just logistics. You sleep on the ground, or what passes for it. A blanket made from stitched together rags and stuffed with straw keeps your skin from blistering too badly, but you still wake up with bug bites and dirt in places you'd rather not think about. There's no pillow. You use your own arm, or sometimes a pile of old laundry that smells like beer and sweat. The air is thick, always, even before the sun rises. It doesn't feel like breathing so much as inhaling someone else's exhale. You learn not to complain, mostly because everyone's already too tired to listen, and also because complaining burns water you can't afford to lose. Morning starts when the light sneaks through a crack in the wall and lands directly on your face, like a cosmic insult. You're already sweating by then, even if it's still cool outside. One of your brothers steps on your hand, trying to get outside to pee, and you only wince a little because you've learned worse things than bruised fingers. You stretch if there's space, and if there isn't, you just sort of unfold your body like a broken chair and start the day. Your first task, aside from not tripping over someone's foot, is food. Breakfast, if you can call it that, is the same every day. A hunk of bread so old it could be carbon dated, dipped in a weak beer that was brewed yesterday in a clay jug and smells faintly of vinegar and feet. The bread is stale, yes, but also gritty. Not because it was baked with exotic spices or toasted to perfection. No, it's gritty because it contains actual grit, sand, dirt, pulverized bits of stone from the grinding mill. You chew slowly because you have no choice. There's no second serving. If it hurts your teeth, that's your problem. And no, the beer doesn't help. It's more like wet bread than a drink, with a foam that slides down your throat like warm pond scum. Sometimes you find a beetle in your portion. You flick it off if you're feeling picky. If not, you eat around it. If it's crunchy, well, it's not because it's toasted. It's crunchy because it's dirt. Your siblings sit beside you, all in various stages of either waking up or falling apart. One of your sisters is already picking at her scalp for lice, while another rocks a baby who hasn't stopped coughing since last harvest. The baby might make it, might not. No one says it out loud, but everyone's thinking it. You'd get used to it if there were such a thing. You just learn to keep going. There's always a floor to sweep, or a pot to scrub, or a priest who wants his sandals cleaned. No one pauses for grief when there are chores to do. The space you call home never smells good. It's a cocktail of old sweat, burnt cooking ash, and the subtle rot of wet clothes that never quite dried. If you're lucky, there's a faint whiff of incense drifting in from the temple down the road. Not because it's meant for you, but because smoke doesn't care about social class. The walls are streaked with fingerprints and smears from cooking oil. The ceiling sometimes drips when the humidity gets too high, which is often. And the insects, constant. Flies, ants, mosquitoes, the occasional spider that you secretly consider a roommate. You don't kill it. You appreciate the competition. You don't own anything. Maybe a clay cup you share with a sibling, or a sliver of copper jewellery your mother gave you when her fingers got too swollen to wear it. That's your inheritance. That and the habit of ducking whenever someone raises their voice. There's no furniture, just baskets, mats, and maybe a single broken stool that everyone avoids because it wobbles like it's cursed. You keep your clothes rolled in a bundle in the corner. They aren't clean, but they aren't the worst ones either. Every now and then, you hear music from the noble quarter. Flutes and harps and laughter. You pretend it doesn't bother you. You even try to convince yourself that their life must be boring. All those clean linens and full bellies. But deep down, you know better. You know you'll never live in a house with painted walls, or sleep on linen sheets. You'll never wake up without back pain, or eat bread that doesn't chip your tooth. You tell yourself that the gods will reward you in the afterlife, but you've never seen proof. All you've seen is more dirt, more chores, more mornings like this one. And now that breakfast is done, it's time to start working. Again. Still. Always. You're told the gods are watching, but if that's true, they must have a cruel sense of humour. You've spent your entire life beneath their unblinking gaze, and not once have they stepped in to make things easier. No sudden miracles, no divine rewards, no pillars of light. Just sand in your eyes, grime under your nails, and an endless list of chores handed down from people who claim the gods love them more. And maybe they're right. Your master certainly lives like the gods are on his side. He's fat and perfumed and full of dates, while you're scrubbing his footprints out of holy places with water that smells like boiled onion skins. Your main job, today at least, is working at the temple. It's one of the biggest buildings in the district, with walls carved in stories you're not allowed to read, and ceilings painted in colours that flake off if you breathe too hard. You're not allowed inside the inner sanctum, of course. That's where the gods live, or at least where the priests say they do. Your job is to keep the outer floors clean, which is tricky, considering they're constantly covered in dust, petals, spilled wine, and occasionally blood. You sweep carefully, eyes down. If you accidentally glance at a statue that's considered too sacred, you might get slapped. If you sneeze during a ceremony, you might get flogged. If you break something, you'll be lucky if they just fire you and don't throw you in the river tied to a jug. You've never spoken directly to a priest. Not really. They speak at you, not with you. Usually in clipped instructions, passive-aggressive prayers, or vague threats about what might happen if you step on the wrong floor tile. They smell like myrrh and fermented milk, and carry themselves like they personally speak with Ra every morning over breakfast. You know better, though. You've seen one of them snoring drunk behind the altar room with vomit on his sandals. You cleaned it up. He didn't say thank you. The ceremonies themselves are long, loud and absurd. You're not supposed to listen, but how could you not? The priests chant over trays of rotting meat, jars of honey, already swarmed by flies, and bowls of incense thick enough to choke a crocodile. They call it sacred. You call it spoiled goose fat and overcooked symbolism. Every once in a while, they bring out a mummified bird or a cat wrapped in linen. These are divine gifts, they say. You're the one who has to carry them back to the storage chamber when the ceremony ends. The smell stays in your hair for days. Sometimes you wonder if the gods even like people. It doesn't feel like they do. They're carved with perfect posture and impossible smiles, sitting on golden thrones or sailing across celestial rivers, while mortals like you beg for crumbs. There are spells and prayers and rules, so many rules, about how to act, what to eat, which way to face when you sleep, and for what. You're still hungry, you're still dirty, you're still wearing the same linen wrap you've had since you were 12. Maybe the gods are real, but they sure don't seem interested in helping you out. Even the animals in the temple are treated better. The sacred ibis gets a private pond. You get shouted at for using too much water to rinse the mop. The temple cat has its own stone pedestal, while you're not allowed to lean against a wall without someone accusing you of being lazy. You once saw a priest cry over a dying falcon. You've never seen one cry over a servant. Your mother tells you to be respectful. The gods gave you life, she says, but you're not so sure that was a gift. Life, in your experience, is just a series of increasingly exhausting obligations, occasionally interrupted by diarrhea or foot infections. You've prayed before, who hasn't? But nothing changes. You still wake up in the same damp bed, still eat the same dusty bread, still listen to the same sermon about how your suffering is a path to eternal joy. You'd rather have a path to clean drinking water. And yet, you keep working. You keep scrubbing the floors and bowing at the right times and pretending the smell of decomposing lotus blossoms isn't making you dizzy. You keep your head down because rebellion isn't an option. No one listens when servants complain. The gods certainly don't. Maybe they're too busy. Maybe they're just tired of people like you asking for help. Maybe they were never listening to begin with. When the day ends and the temple gates close, you're still not done. You carry buckets back to the storeroom, fold ceremonial cloths with hands that shake from hunger, and sweep the same patch of ground one final time, because someone noticed a single petal out of place. Then you leave, quietly, without looking back. You don't say a prayer. You don't offer thanks. You just walk away from the sacred stench of another god who never did a thing for you. Your job isn't glamorous. It isn't spiritual. It isn't even particularly respected by the other servants. You are, quite literally, the bottom of the bucket, and often inside the bucket too. Your primary duty, day after day, is cleaning up after people who act like they've already ascended to the afterlife and left their mortal waste behind as your divine test. You scrub chamber pots until your fingers prune in stale urine, wash your master's crusted feet with water, barely cool enough to suppress the stench, and polish statues of long-dead relatives he claims were important. You've never heard of any of them. You assume they were just as insufferable when alive. The chamber pots are the worst. They're made of rough ceramic with chipped rims and deep grooves that seem purpose-built to trap filth. Some are ornate, painted with little blue lotus flowers, or engraved with faint hieroglyphs, none of which make them smell any better. You carry them to the corner of the servant yard, dump their contents into a pit that foams and buzzes with flies, and then rinse them using a trickle of water that comes out of a pipe you're not sure is legally connected to anything sanitary. Some of the older pots leak. Some of them were clearly cracked and hastily patched with a resin that doesn't hold. And you know what happens when someone's morning offering seeps through onto your feet? Nothing. You keep working. You wash yourself off with yesterday's laundry water and get back to scrubbing, because you're already behind schedule. Your master expects his feet to be washed every afternoon, whether or not he's gone anywhere. Some days he hasn't left the house. Some days he hasn't even left the bed. But you kneel anyway, basin in hand, cloth ready. You pretend the toenails aren't yellowing. You pretend the calluses don't look like tree bark. You pretend not to hear him complain about the temperature of the water while you rub weeks of sweat and dirt from between toes you wouldn't touch if your life weren't already forfeit. Sometimes he hums while you work. That's when you know he's in a good mood. If he goes silent, brace yourself. He's about to remind you who owns your skin. Polishing statues is somehow worse, not because it's physically harder, but because it's mentally exhausting. These are effigies of people who died hundreds of years ago, none of whom you care about, and most of whom probably wouldn't have let you stand in their shadow without a beating. They're carved from sandstone and alabaster, with frozen smirks and eternal arrogance. You're given a rag soaked in lemon water and told to honour them by removing the dust they never see. If you miss a spot, the overseer scolds you. If you press too hard and chip the surface, you might get reassigned to pit duty, or worse, borrowed by the neighbour for a week, which is never a good sign. Everything you clean is somehow sacred or sentimental or spiritually vital, but only when it's convenient. If you accidentally break something, suddenly it was worthless all along. If you clean it perfectly, then it was a holy relic passed down from the gods themselves. You learn not to ask questions. You just nod and wipe and scrape and scrub, knowing full well that even the afterlife isn't going to save you. You've seen the tomb paintings. They show nobles reclining on cushions while servants, just like you, fan them and pour drinks. That's supposed to be paradise. You're still working, just in a fancier robe. The household itself feels eternal, not in a majestic way, but in a suffocating, endless loop kind of way. There's always another mess to clean, another bowl to scrub, another pot to empty. Your master's wife has a small dog that relieves itself in the corner of the courtyard, and somehow that's your responsibility too. You once spent half a day chasing a goose that had gotten into the kitchen and shredded the grain sacks. No one helped. They just watched and laughed while you flailed, ankle deep in feed and feathers, looking like a fool in service of people who wouldn't notice if you died. You clean clothes too, though calling them clothes might be misleading. Most are just long stained tunics that absorb sweat faster than you can wring it out. Washing involves dragging them to the riverbank and pounding them against a rock while trying not to gag at the runoff. You've lost fingernails doing this. You've stepped on fish bones. Once you found a severed finger. No one ever explained that, and you didn't ask. Your tools are old. Your rags are mostly thread. The broom has been repaired with bits of palm fibre and string. The mop head was once part of someone's robe. When something breaks, you fix it with whatever's lying around. New supplies don't come for servants. You get what's left after the noble family replaces their own cushions and sandals and ritual oil burners. Even then, you're expected to be grateful. They say the afterlife is eternal. So is your chore list. Every day bleeds into the next without progress or purpose. You don't move up. You don't earn respect. You don't get rest. Just more stains, more smells, more demands barked from doorways by people who forgot your name years ago, if they ever bothered to learn it. The only thing immortal in this household is the urine stains, and you've started to think they might outlast you. The sun rises early, and without mercy, by the time you've finished your first chore of the day, carrying 2 heavy baskets of mouldy figs to the kitchen, you're already drenched in sweat. Your linen wrap, thin and stained from a dozen previous owners, clings to your back like wet papyrus. You'd like to pretend it keeps you cool, but all it really does is soak up your suffering. You have no sandals. You lost those last season when the straps finally rotted and no one has bothered to replace them. Your feet are hardened, blistered, and darkened by constant exposure. The courtyard stones are already warm underfoot. By midday, they'll be hot enough to cook fish on. Today is offering day. Your master has decided to make a grand appearance at the temple, bringing gifts for the gods, and more importantly, for his own reputation. This means you'll be walking alongside his procession, hauling jars of wine you'll never taste, and baskets of bread you're not allowed to eat. You and 4 other servants carry a golden litter on your shoulders, not because your master needs it, he's perfectly capable of walking, but because appearing carried makes him look wealthier and more important. Never mind that you can feel your spine grinding with every step, or that the handle digs into your collarbone until you worry it might splinter and puncture something vital. The path to the temple is long, exposed, and deeply unkind. The dust rises with every footstep, coating your teeth and burning your throat. The sun pounds down like a punishment, turning the air thick and still. There's no shade, no wind, no relief. You're not even halfway there before your vision starts to shimmer, the edges of your sight curling like papyrus in a fire. You keep walking anyway. If you fall behind, you'll be whipped. If you collapse, someone else will carry your load, and you'll wake up to a beating and a deduction in your grain rations. The last servant who fainted lost 3 days' worth of food and wasn't allowed to rest. He died 2 weeks later, and the household moved on without pause. At the temple, the real spectacle begins. The priests greet your master like a long-lost cousin, bowing and flattering, and pretending not to notice that he smells like sour oil and arrogance. The servants, meanwhile, unload the offerings, arrange them neatly on a stone platform, and back away silently. You're told to stand in place, holding a tray of dried dates while the priests begin chanting. The heat is worse here. The stone beneath you radiates the sun's fury upward, and the incense smoke hangs in the air like a curse. You breathe it in, nauseated, and do your best not to sway. Your legs tremble, your hands ache. Still, you hold the tray. No one looks at you. At the height of the ceremony, a scribe begins to record the event. He dips his reed pen into black ink and starts writing your master's name on a long papyrus scroll. You see the careful, looping strokes, the symbols meant to echo into eternity. Your master stands tall, hands raised toward the statue of the god, as if expecting divine approval to descend at any moment. His name will be remembered. His gifts will be recorded in the temple archives, catalogued with dates and flourishes, preserved for future priests to admire. There will be no mention of you. The person who carried the bread, hauled the wine, held the tray, endured the heat, and scraped the bird droppings off the offering stone before anyone arrived. You are invisible. As the scribe works, you feel your legs buckle. It happens so suddenly you don't have time to brace yourself. The tray tilts in your hands, the dates tumbling like pebbles onto the stone floor, and then the world narrows into a pinpoint of white noise. You collapse near the edge of the temple, landing hard beside the sun-bleached skeleton of a goat that died there weeks ago. No one rushes to help you. A priest glances over, frowns at the mess, and mutters something about disrespect. One of the other servants grabs your arm and drags you out of sight. You're left in a shaded alcove to recover on your own, with a wet cloth slapped over your forehead, like a half-hearted apology. When you wake, the ceremony is over. The scribes are gone. The scroll has been tucked away. The gods, if they were watching, have returned to their usual silence. You sit up slowly, your head pounding and your throat dry as river clay. A passing servant tosses you a crust of old bread. You eat it without thinking, barely noticing the grit. You try not to wonder whether your collapse was recorded, whether the scribe made a note of your failure or simply skipped over it. You already know the answer. Your name won't be written in ink. It won't be carved in stone. It won't be whispered in ritual or lit in flame. You'll be buried in the dirt like a broken bowl, discarded, forgotten, replaced. The most anyone will remember about you is that you once dropped a tray of dates during an important ceremony. And even that won't be said aloud. It'll just be passed between servants as a cautionary tale. Don't be that one. Don't fall. Don't falter. Don't forget that in this world, even the heat outranks you. Illness is constant here. Not dramatic, not sudden, just ever present, like dust or disappointment. You wake up most mornings with a sore throat, a crusted eye, or a stomach that lurches like it's full of gravel. You've learned not to mention it. Everyone is sick. Everyone always has something. A cough that lingers, a rash that won't fade, a dull ache in the joints that gets worse when the sun's high. The worst part is how normal it all feels. No one expects to be healthy. That's a luxury reserved for the people who never have to dig their own latrine. The flies are a constant torment. They land on everything. Your food, your skin, your face, your open wounds. You've stopped swatting at them. It's useless. There are too many, and you're too tired. They seem drawn to you more than anyone else. Maybe because you smell like a fermented onion that's been slowly cooked inside a leather sack. Bathing would help, in theory. In practice, water is rationed, and no one's going to waste a clean bucket on a servant with a rash. The nobles, of course, bathe with scented oils and rose water, and then complain that the air still smells sour. You smell sour because of them. You once got sick after drinking from a communal clay jug left in the courtyard. It had a film on top that shimmered when the light hit it, but you drank anyway. What else were you supposed to do? The next day you couldn't keep anything down. You lay curled on a mat, shivering in the heat, sweating so badly that your blanket turned black with moisture. A priest came by and muttered a short healing prayer over your head. Then he moved on. Your stomach didn't. You spent the night vomiting into a cracked pot and hallucinating that the gods were arguing about whose fault you were. When you told someone later, they laughed. They said, "The gods don't argue over servants," they said. "They just let them rot." Parasites are so common they might as well be family. Worms, fleas, lice, ticks. You've had them all sometimes at the same time. You don't even bother picking the lice anymore unless they're crawling over your eyebrows. Someone once told you about a scribe's wife who imported powder from Nubia that kills them instantly. You wouldn't know. The closest you've come to medicine is chewed herbs spat into your mouth by an old woman with no teeth. You were told it would help your fever. It didn't. But it did give you diarrhea. So maybe it cleansed something. Food doesn't help. What you're given is usually half rotten, undercooked or sour. Bread that's been left in a basket too long and developed a subtle fuzz. Fish that smells like it was caught last month and stored under a pile of dung for safekeeping. You've tried scraping the green bits off, but sometimes the green bits fight back. One of your cousins ate a bad fig last summer and died in his sleep. His mother cried once, quietly, and then got back to work scrubbing laundry. You'd think it would be more shocking, but it wasn't. It's just how things go. The masters, when they get sick, receive visits from temple healers. They lie on clean mats with cold cloths on their heads, while someone waves incense over their feet and recites spells copied from ancient scrolls. If they get worse, they're given bitter potions mixed with honey and prayers written in gold ink. You get a whispered, "You'll feel better tomorrow," and a day off only if you're actively dying. Even then, you're expected to recover quickly. If you don't, your job gets passed to someone else, and your belongings, what few you had, are claimed by whoever finds them first. Your body never truly heals. It just adapts. The cuts on your arms don't close cleanly. They crust over into scabs that take weeks to fade. You're always bruised, always sore. You've started peeing blood now and then, which you assume is bad, but no one's interested. You once told your supervisor, who shrugged and said, "Drink less salt water." You don't remember drinking any salt water. You barely remember drinking water at all. Plague stories drift through the servant quarters sometimes. Tales of far-off villages where people died in droves, their skin turning black and their tongues swelling until they couldn't scream. But those stories are just that, distant. Here people don't die in waves. They die one by one, quietly, consistently. A servant limps one day, coughs the next, and then disappears. No one asks where they went. No one wants to know. It's easier to assume they moved on to another house. It's easier to lie to yourself when the alternative is imagining your own corpse, bloated and alone in a drainage ditch. You're not cursed. That would at least imply intention. You're just dirty and forgotten. You're exposed to every element and every illness, and you have none of the protections the rich call normal. You are, in every meaningful sense, disposable, And the worst part is that your suffering is expected, built in, accepted by the people around you and sanctified by those above you. There are no get-well gifts, no visits, no concern, just work, pain, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll survive long enough to do it all again tomorrow. You don't work for money. You wouldn't even know what to do with money if you had it. The concept of wages, of saving, of buying something you actually want, those are luxuries reserved for people who don't scrub chamber pots or carry temple offerings in 110-degree heat. No, you're paid in barley, beer, and whatever else the household decides counts as enough. It's not a salary, it's a ration, a loosely defined reward for not collapsing in the middle of your duties. If you do collapse, they might deduct part of it for being lazy. The rations come once a day, in theory. In practice, you get them when someone remembers, and they're often reduced for reasons no one explains. Some days you're told the stores are low, even though you saw fresh grain sacks delivered that morning. Other times, your share is temporarily reassigned because the priest's daughter had a craving for honey cakes, or the master's cousin arrived unannounced and brought a pet baboon that needed feeding. And you're expected to smile and nod like it makes sense. If you speak up, they remind you how lucky you are to get anything at all. You eat what they give you, no matter what it is. Stale barley bread that cracks at the edges and turns to paste in your mouth. Watery beer that smells like someone tried to ferment a mop. Occasionally, a handful of lentils or a scoop of something that used to be fish. It's not enough to fill you, but it's enough to keep you upright. And that's the entire strategy. They don't want you nourished. They want you just functional enough to carry things without dropping them. Too weak and you're a liability. Too strong and you might get ideas. Hunger, carefully managed, is the perfect leash. You've learned tricks to stretch your meals. You chew slowly. You drink water before eating so your stomach thinks it's full. You trade scraps with other servants when your body starts to reject the same meal for the 5th time in a row. Once, someone smuggled in a bruised date and split it 6 ways. You all agreed it was the best thing you'd tasted in months. Another time, someone found an old pomegranate behind the temple and nearly lost a finger in the scramble for seeds. Moments like that are rare. Most days your stomach growls like a jackal and you pretend not to notice. You're always aware of the ration tally. Every worker is, whether they admit it or not. Who's gotten more? Who's gotten less? Who's been docked? Who's quietly being favoured? It breeds resentment. Not that anyone can afford to act on it. The system is so thoroughly entrenched, so deeply unfair, that even complaining feels like a waste of energy. You save your breath for your chores, and your anger for the nights when the growling in your gut keeps you awake. That's when you think about the people feasting in the upper courtyard, throwing away food you would kill to eat. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of a fig or a roasted pigeon leg being tossed aside. You don't resent them for wasting it. You resent them for having the option. When the actual distribution happens, it's never quick. You line up with the others, eyes sunken, hands out, trying not to look too desperate because desperation is considered undignified. The steward sits behind a table with a clay tablet and a chipped ladle, calling out names with the enthusiasm of a man halfway to death himself. He hands you your portion without looking at you, like passing a bowl to a dog. You bow slightly, you take it, you step aside. That's the routine, every day, over and over, a ceremony of survival. Sometimes they forget your name. You have to explain who you are, where you work, what your duties are, why you haven't been reassigned. You feel yourself shrink every time it happens, not just because of the mistake, but because it confirms what you already suspect. You don't matter. You're a shadow in the corner of someone else's world. If you disappeared, the bread would still be baked, the floors would still be swept. You're not essential. You're just next in line. And yet, despite the humiliation, you keep showing up. You keep standing in that line because what else is there? If you don't eat, you can't work. If you don't work, you get beaten or cast out or quietly replaced. You've seen it happen before. A servant disappears and no one asks why. There's just one fewer bowl at dinner and a little more room in the sleeping quarters. You suspect they died, but it's easier not to be sure. Certainty requires energy you don't have. You're hungry, but not starving. Just enough to work. Just enough to function. Just enough to survive another day in a system designed to drain you slowly. No feast is coming. No reward waits at the end. There is only the next bowl of barley and the hope that, for once, no one cuts your share in half to feed the whims of someone who doesn't know your name. You're told it's an honour to be rotated to the royal tomb site. They say it like a reward, like your years of servitude have earned you a place among greatness. But when you arrive, there's no fanfare. No priests waiting to bless your tools. No golden chisel with your name on it. Just a sunburned overseer barking orders and a pile of rocks taller than your house. You're not here to decorate the walls with celestial boats or etch sacred hymns into limestone. You're here to haul debris, stack bricks, carry sand, and bleed into the foundation of someone else's afterlife. The royal tomb is chaos. It's a massive pit in the desert, surrounded by scaffolding that creaks like a dying animal. Every surface is covered in dust, sweat, and broken dreams. You're given a basket, a rope, and a vague idea of what to do. Most of your time is spent ferrying rubble from one place to another, which sounds simple until you realise the rocks aren't cut or sorted. They're jagged, heavy, and always seem to be crawling with centipedes. You carry them anyway, stumbling across uneven ground while the sun tries to boil your organs. You're not paid extra for this. You're not fed better. You're just told to be grateful. There are hundreds of you. Some are young boys barely out of childhood. Others are older men, with knees that crunch and hips that seize up mid-step. None of you are important. The important people are the artisans working inside the tomb, painting stars on the ceiling and drawing flattering pictures of the Pharaoh smiting his enemies. You don't speak to them. You don't even look at them. You're just one more anonymous body, sweating your usefulness into the sand while someone else carves history. You envy the ones who work indoors, even if they're only slightly less miserable. At least they don't have to vomit in the sun. Yes, vomiting is a regular part of this job. You throw up from the heat. You throw up from the spoiled beer they gave you for lunch. You throw up from the stench of death clinging to the stones that used to be part of older tombs, now recycled into Pharaoh's monument to eternity. You lean against a half-buried statue and retch until your ribs hurt. Then you wipe your mouth, spit, and get back to lifting. No one offers help. No one has the time. If you pass out, someone will drag you into the shade until you stop twitching. Then they'll take your basket. Blisters come first, then the back pain, then the spasms in your arms, so sharp you drop what you're carrying and pray no one saw. You can feel your spine grinding with every motion, each vertebra trying to betray the others. Your hands are calloused but still manage to split open in new places every day. You've started pissing blood. You tell yourself it's normal, that it'll pass, that this is just what hard work feels like. But you know the truth. You're not getting stronger. You're breaking slowly and silently, like every rock you've dropped along the way. The tomb is being built for someone who's already dead. That's the part that stings the most. All this effort, this pain, this labour, it's not even for the living. The Pharaoh died months ago, maybe longer, and now his body lies embalmed in oils and perfumes you've never even smelled, surrounded by gold masks and ceremonial dolls that cost more than your entire family's lifetime of work. You've glimpsed some of the treasures being hauled inside: ivory combs, jewelled daggers, miniature chariots made of silver. He won't use any of it. But you're not even buried with a name. They say this tomb will ensure the Pharaoh's eternal life. that every brick placed, every symbol carved, is a step toward divine immortality. But all you see is a trench full of misery. You know that centuries from now, people will stare in awe at what you helped build. They'll marvel at the engineering, the craftsmanship, the sheer ambition. No one will ask about the labourers. No one will mention the man who died when a block rolled onto his chest, or the boy who fell from the scaffolding and was quietly buried behind the storage hut. Your story ends in a shallow grave and a forgotten name. The overseers say this is noble work, that you're part of something bigger than yourself. But what's noble about lifting the same basket of sand 10 times because no one can agree where it belongs? What's noble about bruised kidneys and chipped teeth and blinding headaches that make you weep silently in the shade behind a monument to someone else's vanity? There's no nobility here, just exhaustion and dust and the slow certainty that you are a replaceable cog in a machine powered by suffering. Pharaoh's eternal glory is built on your very mortal kidney stones. That's the truth of it. Your body will fail before the tomb is finished, and when it does, they'll simply move you aside, hand your tools to someone else, and keep building. Because the afterlife doesn't wait. Not for servants, not for the dying, and definitely not for you. There's no such thing as equality in a servant's life. You might think that once you've hit rock bottom, the ground can't get any lower, but it turns out misery has layers, and someone's always been assigned to mop the one beneath you. Even in servitude, there's a pecking order, a delicate lattice of humiliation, favoritism, and silent resentment. You serve the ones who answer to someone who once carried a message to a scribe who briefly stood near a man, who speaks to the steward, who might, on very rare occasions, catch a glimpse of the hem of Pharaoh's robe. That's how many people are between you and power. That's how far down the ladder you've fallen, and someone still manages to step on your fingers. Your status is unofficial, but everyone knows it. You're not one of the kitchen boys, who at least get to lick the pots when no one's looking. You're not one of the laundry workers who sometimes sneak a nap behind the drying lines and come back smelling like sun instead of ammonia. You're not even one of the stable hands who get kicked by donkeys but are left alone most of the day. No, you're assigned to the general duties, which is a nice way of saying whatever job is too filthy, too boring, or too pointless for anyone else. If something breaks, you fix it. If something leaks, you clean it. If someone vomits, you mop it up, unless a higher-ranking servant tells you it's their job, in which case you stand back and let them do it, quietly envying their authority over bodily fluids. The man who sweeps the master's vomit, in fact, has more seniority than you. He has his own broom. A proper one, not the one you use, which is little more than bundled reeds tied together with a strip of cloth that might once have been someone's undergarment. He keeps his broom propped neatly in the servant hallway, proudly marked with a scrap of red twine to show it's his. You asked once if you could borrow it. He laughed for a full minute, then walked away without answering. That's how you learned the rules. Not from a list or a briefing, but from silence, side eyes, and the sudden realization that there are 10 kinds of disgrace, and you've somehow acquired most of them. There are favourites, of course. The younger servants who still have all their teeth and can flash a charming smile are sometimes chosen to deliver messages to the noble family or help the mistress arrange her jewellery. These chosen few walk differently, talk differently, even eat differently when they think no one's watching. They puff up with borrowed dignity, pretending not to hear when you ask for help, lifting something, or when you're struggling to carry 2 buckets of slop down the stairs. You watch them stroll by, balancing trays of fruit they'll probably sneak a taste of, and you feel the quiet sting of invisible separation. They're not better than you, but someone decided they might be, and that's all it takes. Sometimes there are punishments handed down, not for what you did, but for who you aren't. A higher-ranked servant snaps at a steward, and suddenly you're the one scrubbing the floor under his bed as penance. A kitchen boy drops a cup, and you're blamed because you must have distracted him. You learn to take it. Protesting only makes it worse. You try to disappear, to be invisible, but even invisibility has a hierarchy. There's the invisible who are respected, and the invisible who are disposable. You already know which one you are. There's an inner circle among the servants, those who work in the upper chambers, who handle the master's robes, who whisper gossip like it's currency. You're never invited. You don't even pretend to be curious anymore. You just deliver what they ask for and leave before they remember to mock you. One time, you overheard someone in that group say your name. You paused, hopeful for a second, until you heard the punchline. They were joking about how you walk, how your limp makes you look like a wounded bird. You didn't say anything, you just kept walking. Limping, apparently. The truly crushing part is that, even knowing all of this, you still strive. You still hope, in some dusty corner of your mind, that you might earn a better spot. Not freedom, of course, that's absurd, but maybe a task indoors, a job with shade, a broom that isn't splintered, something, anything. You work hard not because you believe it'll save you, but because doing otherwise feels like inviting more pain. And every now and then someone does get promoted. A backroom scrubber becomes a linen boy. A bucket carrier is moved to courtyard duty. You pretend not to care, but it gnaws at you. You know your place. You live it every day. You're the last to eat and the first to clean. You're the one sent out in the rain, the one yelled at when something is missing, the one blamed when the firewood is damp. When a nobleman sneers, it's your back that straightens. When a priest frowns, it's your knees that hit the ground. You're not just at the bottom of the hierarchy. You're the dirt it's built on. And the worst part is, even among the wretched, you still manage to come in last. You're not unfamiliar with pain. It's part of the rhythm of your life, like hunger or heat, or the soft crunch of sand in every bite of food. But there's a specific kind of pain that comes not from injury or illness, but from punishment. A punishment that arrives whether or not you did anything wrong. In this house, the line between guilt and convenience is paper thin, and your back has paid the price more times than you can count. Sometimes you're flogged for dropping something, sometimes for speaking out of turn, sometimes for being near the person who actually made the mistake, and sometimes, maybe most of all, you're whipped simply because someone in power needed to remind everyone else who decides what justice looks like. There's no ceremony to it, no formal announcement, no inquiry, no question of whether what happened was fair. The master grows irritated. Maybe the stew was cold, or the breeze didn't come through the courtyard fast enough, or a sandal strap snapped while he was walking, and then someone has to suffer for it. That someone is often you. You've developed a sixth sense for when it's coming. The sudden silence, the narrowing of eyes, the way the servants start to edge out of the room before the anger has a target. You're rarely fast enough. Your face is familiar. Your name is forgettable. Your spine, apparently, is just the right height for lashing. The overseers make a show of it. You're dragged out into the courtyard where everyone can see, because punishment must be public to be effective. You kneel, or you're forced to. Your tunic is yanked down your back. Then come the blows. Not too many at once, no one wants to kill a servant unless it's absolutely necessary, but enough to bruise, to break skin, to make sure you don't sleep well for a week. The whip is made of leather, with bone sewn into the tip. It doesn't just cut, it bites. You've screamed before. You've tried not to, but it always comes out eventually, and the other servants look away, not out of pity, but because they know their turn will come soon enough. Afterward, you're expected to get back to work. No rest, no apology, no salve for the wounds. If you're lucky, another servant might slip you a scrap of cloth to staunch the bleeding, or pour a little beer over the cuts to keep them from festering. But mostly, you just go on. Bent a little lower, breathing a little harder, quietly wishing you were someone else, or no one at all. You've seen others beaten too, of course. A girl your age was once struck across the face, with a sandal because she didn't bow low enough. The mark swelled and darkened, and she couldn't open her eye for days. A kitchen boy lost 2 fingernails when he was caught stealing dates that were already starting to rot in the heat. He still works here, only now he keeps his hands behind his back and avoids eye contact with anyone in a linen robe. The punishments aren't always physical. Sometimes a servant is starved for days or reassigned to the latrines, or made to stand in the sun with arms raised until they collapse. These are not official rules. These are whims, wrapped in authority and flavoured with cruelty. And none of it is consistent. You might go a whole week without incident. The household might seem calm. You might start to believe that you're doing everything right. Then suddenly, someone is in a foul mood, and you're back on the ground, breath knocked from your chest, wondering what you could have done differently. The truth is, it doesn't matter. There is no safety, only delay. You're never far from someone's anger, never protected from the consequences of someone else's boredom. Your master's mood is more powerful than any law. Some of the other servants try to stay cheerful, as if pretending not to live in fear might make it so. They laugh too loudly, smile too quickly, and murmur prayers under their breath before entering a room. You've tried that. You've whispered to the gods, pleaded for mercy, even made little offerings with crumbs you could barely afford to lose. Nothing changed. The whip still came. The bruises still bloomed. The only thing that praying seemed to do was make you feel more betrayed when no one answered. You carry the evidence on your body, scars across your shoulders, a notch in your eyebrow from where a bowl was thrown, a jagged line on your thigh that never healed cleanly. You know you're not supposed to complain. You know you're supposed to be grateful for the work, for the food, for the roof. But it's hard to be thankful when the people who house you also hurt you, when the people who feed you also starve you, when the people who say they are better than you treat you like refuse. Private despair becomes your companion. It settles in the spaces between punishments, in the quiet hours of the night when you lie on your mat, staring at the cracked ceiling, waiting for sleep that never comes. You don't cry, you don't even feel sad, just hollow, just worn down, like a tool that's been used too long and sharpened too often until there's nothing left to grind. You've heard people say that suffering builds character, that it makes you stronger, but you know better. It just makes you quiet, careful, small, and very, very tired. You don't die in battle. You don't collapse dramatically in the temple courtyard or get struck down by divine lightning in some poetic twist of fate. You die in your 20s from a cracked tooth that got infected. It started small, just an ache that worsened with every bite, then a swelling in your jaw, then a fever that made your skin feel like it was trying to boil its way off. You kept working through it, of course. There was no choice. No one gets time off for tooth pain. You were still scrubbing floors with one hand and holding your face with the other when you stopped being able to stand. You spent your final hours lying on a mat in the corner of the servant quarters, tucked behind a stack of baskets, so no one would trip over you. The others gave you space, not out of kindness, but because they didn't want to catch whatever you had. One girl left a damp cloth on your forehead. It was the closest thing to comfort you received. No one called for a healer. No one asked a priest for intervention. There are no resources for the dying unless you die loudly enough to be inconvenient. You kept quiet, even when the pain made your eyes water and your breath come in short, shallow gasps. You didn't want to be punished for making noise on your way out. When you stopped breathing, no one noticed at first. It wasn't until someone came looking for an extra pair of hands to carry water that they found you, curled up, jaw clenched, body still. There was a moment of silence, not out of grief, but out of calculation. Then someone said your name, twice just to be sure. When you didn't respond, they called for the steward. He came, looked at you, shrugged, and told 2 other servants to move your body to the disposal pit behind the outer wall. You were wrapped in an old linen sheet that still smelled faintly of vinegar and sweat. No one wept, no one sang, no one whispered a prayer. The disposal pit is where they bury the ones who don't matter. You'd been there before, dropping off waste or clearing out dead vermin. You never thought you'd end up there too, though you should have. Most of your kind do. It's a shallow trench filled with bones, discarded sandals, broken tools, and forgotten faces. Your body was dumped among them like just another bit of refuse. The sheet unravelled slightly when they let go, and your arm landed at an awkward angle. No one fixed it. There was no ceremony. Just dirt tossed lazily over your legs, and a few muttered curses about the smell. While you were being covered in sand, a priest was holding a blessing ceremony nearby for a golden cat figurine that had been placed in the temple's inner shrine. It was polished, decorated with lapis, and treated like royalty. The figurine received incense, chant, and praise. Its journey to the afterlife was considered sacred. Yours wasn't mentioned. No one stood over your grave. No one lit a lamp or said your name aloud. As far as the world was concerned, you had already disappeared. You're not missed? Not really. The household continues without you. Your chores are reassigned within the hour. Someone else is handed your broom, your rag, your list of tasks. They don't ask how you died, and they don't care. Your spot on the mat is quickly filled. The grain portions are recalculated. If anyone remembers you, it's as a point of comparison. At least I'm not as slow as that one. You vanish, not dramatically, but quietly, like the echo of a forgotten name, swallowed by a house that never noticed. You were there in the first place. The worst part is that your afterlife isn't what you were promised. You were told that if you served well, if you obeyed, if you kept your head down and your heart pure, you'd be rewarded in the field of reeds, a paradise of abundance where the air is cool and the food is endless, and no one makes you clean anything ever again. But no one prepared your body. No one recited the correct spells or buried you with the right offerings. You didn't get an amulet. You didn't even get a name tag. Your soul, if it escaped at all, wandered off into the dark without a map. Maybe the gods know you're out there. Maybe they don't. Maybe your spirit is stuck somewhere between this world and the next, forgotten even in death. Or maybe there's nothing at all, just the slow decay of flesh and the steady work of insects. You were told the body was sacred, but yours is food now. Your afterlife begins and ends with maggots. You're not honoured, you're not even mentioned in passing. There's no plaque, no stone, no whispered story. You lived as a tool and died as trash. And if that seems harsh, it's only because you had hoped, deep down, for something more. Some sign that your suffering meant something, some shred of meaning. But the truth is, in this world and the next, no one mourns a servant. Time doesn't care about you. It doesn't pause to acknowledge your pain or reflect on your short life or wonder what became of the person who once hauled jugs of water across sun-baked stone. It just moves forward, slowly at first, then all at once. The world you knew begins to fade the moment your body cools. The others forget you. Your name slips from their tongues, then from their thoughts entirely. The mat where you once slept is passed on. The bucket you used becomes someone else's responsibility. And then, not long after, the household itself changes. The family you served dies out or moves on. New masters arrive. New servants replace the old. No one asks where you went. The temple, once pristine, begins to crumble. The paint fades, the carvings chip, the incense stops burning, the priests grow fewer, the offerings less elaborate. The golden cat is eventually stolen or misplaced, and no one performs the rituals anymore. The stone walls, once polished smooth, are now scarred by time and wind. People pass by without stopping. The sacred becomes background, and the background is forgotten. Seasons come and go. The Nile floods and recedes. Sand drifts steadily into every crack and crevice, burying what once mattered. Tombs are swallowed whole. Homes collapse inward, and entire quarters of the city vanish beneath dunes. Years pass, then centuries, The world changes languages. New rulers rise and fall. New gods replace the old. Your bones, buried without care, turn to powder. Even the pit you were thrown into becomes unrecognizable. Just another patch of ground where weeds refuse to grow. No one marks the spot. No one visits. You disappear, quietly and entirely, as though you were never there to begin with. Eventually, what remains of your world becomes a curiosity. Explorers arrive from distant lands, digging through sand with tools you wouldn't recognize. They marvel at what they find: temples, scrolls, pottery, tombs filled with golden masks and painted ceilings. They call it beautiful, majestic. They speak of a great civilization, of brilliant minds and divine rulers, and incredible achievements. They build museums and publish books. They point at statues and whisper about mystery and wonder, never once asking who cleaned the floors, who carried the stone, who scrubbed the blood from the offering tables. Your story isn't part of the narrative. It doesn't fit the tone. Your suffering is inconvenient, easier to package as a symbol of devotion than what it really was. A life spent in forced labour, forgotten in death, erased by time. Historians might refer to the servant class, as if that's a sufficient summary. They might note in passing that life was hard for the lower orders, without going into the specifics of your bruises or your hunger or the way your hands trembled after a full day spent polishing the feet of a statue that got more sleep than you did. Tourists arrive and take photos of the ruins. They marvel at the scale of the structures, the elegance of the hieroglyphs, the complexity of burial rites. They stand in front of monuments you helped build and smile for the camera. Some even speak reverently of the people who made all this possible, never realizing that the people include you, and that you were never thanked, never paid, never seen. They imagine a noble past full of wisdom and ritual. They do not imagine you vomiting from heat stroke behind a crumbling wall or collapsing from an infected tooth no one bothered to treat. They say your civilization was great, that it stood for millennia, that it shaped the future, and maybe it did, but you didn't. You weren't shaping anything. You were trying to survive. You were trying not to be beaten, not to be forgotten, not to lose your share of barley, because the steward's nephew felt entitled to double rations. You weren't chosen, you were used, and then discarded, and then buried beneath centuries of praise for the men who stood above you. The sand is thorough. It doesn't just bury the dead, it buries the truth. It smooths over cruelty, rewrites history, and polishes oppression until it shines like marble. The cracks are still there, of course, but they're hard to see when the story has been carefully edited, when the past is presented like a mural instead of a wound. No one will find your name. There's no inscription, no record. The scribe never paused to write down the servant who carried the offerings, or bled in the quarry, or dropped the tray of dates before passing out in the heat. And because your name wasn't written, it doesn't survive. You're not in the scrolls, you're not in the tombs, you're not in the prayers. The sand covers everything, including your existence, and yet you were there. You lived, even if only briefly. You suffered deeply and constantly. You worked harder than anyone will ever know. That should mean something, but it doesn't. Because the world remembers what it chooses to, and you were never chosen. You were just used. They come with cameras now. Air-conditioned buses roll up to the ruins, filled with tourists wearing sunglasses and wide-brimmed hats. They step out into the sun and immediately complain about the heat. Just a bit too warm for their comfort, even though they'll be back in the shade within an hour. They carry water bottles, fans and guidebooks. They're not prepared for discomfort, not even the mildest version of it, and yet they're here to admire the very buildings that were born from your discomfort. Your work, your pain. They call it a marvel. They speak of the symmetry, the engineering, the artistic flourishes on the temple walls. They nod along as the guide talks about the brilliance of the ancient Egyptians, the glory of the pharaohs, the sacredness of rituals. They snap photos of columns you scrubbed clean and statues you were once forbidden to look at. They whisper about mystery and wisdom while standing on ground that was soaked, again and again, with the sweat and blood of nameless workers, like you. They don't see you. They see the monument you helped build and died under. They walk through reconstructed courtyards, staring at faded murals and half-preserved inscriptions. They wonder aloud how it must have felt to live back then, in such a rich and spiritual age. Some even romanticize it. They talk about the beauty of simplicity, the purity of devotion, the nobility of labour. They buy trinkets shaped like scarabs and ankhs and tiny golden coffins, as if the symbols you once cleaned for hours could be reduced to keychains and fridge magnets. They say it all feels magical. Occasionally, one of them will point at a painting or a relief that shows servants carrying jars or workers building a tomb. They'll chuckle or frown thoughtfully and say something like, "Imagine doing that all day." Then they move on. They never stop to imagine what it actually meant. The blisters, the injuries, the disease, the fact that you didn't get to stop, that there was no clocking out, no weekend, no choice. They're imagining a chore, not a sentence, and certainly not a death sentence. The guides don't talk about you. Not really. You're mentioned in broad strokes. Labourers, workers, the lower classes, never individuals, never real people. You're part of the background, the scaffolding holding up the grand narrative of kings and gods. The tour focuses on the lives of nobles, the treasures found in tombs, the cleverness of royal architects. No one mentions the girl who broke her ankle carrying bricks, or the boy who drowned in a well after being sent for water and never came back. No one mentions the servant whose name was never written, who collapsed under a statue too heavy for 3 men to carry, and was buried right there under the floor. They admire the layout of the tombs and temples, unaware of how many lives it took to build them. They touch the stone walls and talk about the passage of time, not knowing that you once leaned against that same wall to catch your breath and were yelled at for resting. They pose for pictures next to pillars, blissfully unaware that the symbols carved into the surface were once sacred, dangerous, and forbidden to people like you. You had to bow in the presence of those images. They get to post them on social media with captions like, "Lost in ancient Egypt." Sometimes they ask how the civilization fell. The guide gives a tidy answer. Climate change, war, economic decline. The tourists nod, satisfied. No one asks what happened to the servants, to the people who never had wealth or a legacy, the ones whose bones were swept into nameless graves and forgotten before the sand even settled, the ones whose deaths were never recorded because they were too common to be remarkable. You know what happened. You were replaced. That's how the system worked. When you broke, they found another back to bend. When you died, they handed your tasks to someone younger. That's all. They call this civilization. They say it with reverence, with awe. But you remember what it really was. Not a shining beacon of humanity, but a machine built from suffering. A society founded on inequality so deep it was considered sacred. Every inch of beauty admired today was purchased with a lifetime of labour from people no one mourned. Every column that still stands did so by pushing you into the ground a little further. Every preserved artefact is a polished reminder that some lives are remembered and others are erased by design. They will never find your name. They will never hear your story unless someone dares to look beyond the carvings and into the cracks between them. But even then, they might not want to know. They prefer the fantasy, the myth of grandeur, the sanitized version of history that turns pain into pageantry and labour into legacy. And as they board their bus, sipping chilled water and fanning themselves, they take one last look at the ruins and smile. You were here, you mattered, but not to them, not to the story they came for. You are not the marvel, you are the buried cost of it. You liked to believe once that you were special. Maybe not in the way nobles were, your name written in ink, your face carved into stone, but in the small, quiet way of someone who tried to do their job well. You thought that if you worked hard enough, if you were fast and careful and obedient, someone might notice, that your efforts would matter, that the gods might see your discipline, that the overseers might remember your name when it came time to hand out tasks or food or mercy. But that was a child's thought, a harmless lie whispered in the back of your mind to keep you moving. The truth was always simpler. You were never singular. You were a number, a hand, a back, a pair of feet to walk where someone pointed. When you failed, someone else stepped in before your body was even cold. When you succeeded, no one celebrated. The best you could hope for was to go unnoticed, because being noticed usually meant punishment or more work. You were never irreplaceable. You were designed not to be. The whole system functioned on your expendability. There were 1,000 more like you, even in your lifetime. Boys and girls born into mud brick homes, fed just enough to keep moving, sent out with brooms or baskets, or knives to clean, fetch, carry, or scrape. Some lasted a few years, some lasted longer. None lasted forever. And when they were gone, their absence didn't echo. Their places were filled the way you patch a hole in a roof, quickly, with whatever's on hand. You saw it happen over and over. A servant disappears and the only discussion is whether they left any usable tools behind. No bard sings for the kitchen boy who bled into the lentils because the knife slipped and he didn't dare stop working. No one writes odes to the girl who miscarried while grinding flour and went back to work the next day with tears in her eyes and blood on her ankles. There is no statue for the man who died carrying bricks up a scaffold that collapsed under his weight. No grave markers for the nameless. Just dirt. Just more bodies layered beneath the sand, indistinguishable from one another. The monuments weren't built to remember people like you. They were built to remember the people who used you. Every elegant arch and hieroglyph-covered wall is a monument not to civilization as a whole, but to the very few who sat at the top and convinced the world they deserved it. Their names endure not because they were better, but because they had the resources to make their memory unavoidable. They paid to be remembered. You paid to be forgotten. You think about this sometimes. The staggering number of lives like yours that vanished without record. You wonder how many hands it took to build the temple gates, how many backs bent to dig the canals, how many fingers were crushed beneath wheels, how many tongues silenced by fear, how many eyes closed on their last day without ever having seen more than their master's walls. You wonder how many people believed, as you once did, that they could make themselves matter, only to learn too late that the world was never built to care. And the worst part, it still isn't. You know, if you could see far enough into the future, you'd find others just like you. In every age, in every civilization, there are people who clean, carry, build, serve, and die with no reward. Their faces are different, their names are changed, but their lives follow the same blueprint. Born into labour, told to be grateful, discarded when broken. History repeats itself, not because it forgets, but because it chooses not to remember the ones it stepped over. There is comfort, maybe, in knowing you weren't alone, that you were one thread in a massive, invisible tapestry of suffering. But it's a bitter comfort, because being part of something doesn't mean much when that something is built to erase you. There's no immortality in numbers, only anonymity, only the knowledge that your life was not a story, but a function. Not a legacy, but a utility. You were not chosen. You were convenient. Sometimes you wonder if any of the others were remembered. Maybe one of them told a joke that survived a few retellings. Maybe someone drew a face in the dirt that was meant to be theirs. Maybe a few were lucky enough to be buried with their names scratched onto a broken pot. But most weren't. Most ended the way you did, in silence, in service, in soil. The world calls this progress. They look at the monuments and marvel at the civilization that built them. But you remember the faces behind the scaffolds, the hands trembling under baskets of stone, the quiet sobs of someone who knew their life would never be more than a list of thankless tasks. You remember because you were one of them, and the world doesn't need you to forget. It needs you never to be heard in the first place. There were 1,000 more like you. There still are. The sand is quiet now. The wind blows across the ruins where you once lived, where you once worked, where you once bled. The stones you scrubbed are cracked and half buried. The walls you brushed with your sleeve are eroded down to their bones. No one remembers your name. No one even knew it in the first place. And yet you were here. You lived, you tried, you hurt, and then you died, quietly, quickly, forgettably. The earth didn't shake when you left. No god descended to mark your passing. No one paused their day to say your name aloud. You just stopped being, and the world went on like you were never part of it. It feels finished now. Final. The air is still, and the dust settles gently over what's left of your story. There's a kind of peace in that, perhaps. Not the satisfying kind. There was no justice, no balance, no redemption arc, but the exhausted kind. The peace that comes after you've given everything you had and still been overlooked. The kind of peace you don't choose, but accept because the alternative is more suffering. Sleep now feels like the only thing left to do, not because you're safe, but because there's finally nothing left expected of you. But the truth is, it isn't really over. Not for everyone. Someone else is carrying water right now, barefoot, across hot stones that burn through calloused skin. Someone else is bowing in front of a master who doesn't know their name. Someone else is cleaning a sacred place they're not allowed to look at. History keeps moving, but it doesn't always move forward. It loops, it spirals, it settles back into familiar patterns. New names, new gods, same burdens. You were replaced before your body cooled, and that cycle never stopped. Somewhere right now, someone is holding their breath, trying not to cry as they're beaten for a mistake they didn't make. Maybe they're listening to this. Maybe someone, lying in their own corner of history, is hearing your story and recognizing it as their own. The details shift, the clothes, the language, the setting, but the core remains the same. Labor without end, pain without recognition, existence without dignity. The names of the powerful are still carved into stone. The names of the forgotten are still dust. Someone, somewhere, is still being told that they should be grateful for scraps. That obedience is holiness. That silence is survival. You're not the first servant to suffer in silence. You won't be the last. There will always be those who build and those who claim the credit. Those who carry the weight and those who never feel it. Those who are buried in gold and those who are buried in the dirt beneath their feet. Civilization, for all its glory, is still built the same way it always was, on the backs of people who never had a choice. The faces may change, the titles may evolve, but the foundation remains painfully familiar. And that foundation is full of people like you. But maybe, just maybe, being forgotten by the world doesn't mean your story can't be told. Maybe your worth isn't measured by the names that survived, but by the truth that remains when the carvings fade. You weren't a monument, but you were real. You weren't remembered, but you mattered. You weren't recorded, but you were felt. Every stone laid by your hand is still in place. Every bowl you carried fed someone who went on to write the story of greatness. You were never seen, but you were always essential. Now you rest, and maybe that's enough. No more lists, no more lashes, no more sour beer in a chipped cup, or sand in your teeth as you chew yesterday's bread. No more waking before sunrise to mop blood off a floor for a god who never spoke your name. No more pretending that the afterlife will make it right when this life already spent you like a coin. It's over. Not fair, not just, but done. Let the sand cover you. Let the wind erase your footprints. Let the past close its mouth around you and finish the sentence you never had time to write. You are here. And if that matters to no one else, let it matter now, in this quiet space where your story finally got to be told. Not in gold, not in ink, but in truth. If you're still with me, thank you for drifting through history with me. If you'd like early access to more slow-burning, soft-spoken walks through the forgotten corners of history, plus perks like ad-free audio of these episodes, you'll find the Patreon link in the description. Feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the exact moment you think you'd have given up the broom. And if you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps others find these episodes. Sleep well.